A package is lying by the door, unassuming, light, no prestige logo, no gold embossing, no story written in marketing slogans. Inside, there is a projector that costs less than an average computer monitor. A few minutes later, an image appears on the wall. Not perfect, not cinematic, but good enough to turn an ordinary room into a makeshift home theater. And right here, in this small, private moment, a story begins that most YouTube reviews never really tell, because this projector is not merely a Temu gadget or a cheap AliExpress impulse buy. It is a tangible byproduct of a global production system that stretches from Chinese industrial zones through the corridors of the new Silk Road and into European sorting hubs and parcel lockers outside apartment blocks. In recent years, the projector market has gone through a quiet revolution. It used to be dominated by a handful of Western brands, expensive office devices, and a premium segment that felt almost like a separate universe. Today, it has become a field of mass OEM production, where hundreds of factories build the same hardware platforms and sell them under dozens of different names. The projector stopped being a luxury. It became an infrastructural commodity, an element of low-cost entertainment powered by logistics and sheer production scale. The low price is not the result of a technological miracle. It is the result of a cost spreadsheet, design compromises, a minimalist casing, cheaper optical assemblies, standardized electronics, and above all, a global flow of goods that can move production from an Asian factory straight into a European living room while bypassing the classic distribution chain. The same mechanism that reshaped televisions, laptops, and smartphones is now redefining projectors as well. The names printed on the casing are increasingly rarely the names of the real makers. More often, they are labels attached to an OEM platform. Factories, not brands, determine what truly reaches the market, and Temu and AliExpress are not just online stores. They are instruments of this transformation, distribution channels for a new trade model, in which a product leaves the factory and reaches the consumer faster than ever, often without intermediaries, without regional warehouses, without local brands acting as gatekeepers. This episode is not about whether a cheap projector is worth buying. It is about why it can be so cheap in the first place, who actually produces it, which interests shape its logistics route, and why even its plastic casing is the outcome of economic decisions rather than aesthetic ones. Because today's projector is no longer just a device that throws an image onto a wall. It is a piece of a global industrial puzzle, a small component of the new Silk Road, a product of an era in which home cinema is not born in an engineering studio, but at the intersection of logistics, geopolitics, and mass production. When people talk about projectors from Temu, AliExpress, or the budget lines of recognizable brands, they still tend to think in the old categories of manufacturer, brand, and model. In reality, that map has been redrawn for a long time. The modern projector market is not built around brands. It is built around OEM and ODM factories that design, manufacture, and standardize entire hardware platforms. An OEM does not sell emotion. An OEM sells infrastructure. It is the factory that designs a complete projector as a system: the mainboard, the power subsystem, the optics, the cooling, the Android firmware, the casing, and the assembly process. The brand you see on the box is often just a customer of that system. It orders a finished product, prints a logo, picks a plastic color, sometimes swaps the boot animation. The technological core remains the same. This model did not emerge from ideology. It emerged from economics. Designing a projector from scratch means major costs: engineering teams, optical testing, certifications, production tooling, logistics infrastructure. For most companies that want to enter the budget segment, that effort makes no sense. It is cheaper to buy a ready OEM platform and build a marketing narrative around it. As a result, a single factory can produce the same projector in a dozen variants. The model name changes, the packaging changes, the remote changes, sometimes the casing changes slightly. The electronics stay identical. That is why on e-commerce platforms, you see dozens of projectors that look like clones. It is not copying. It is mass distribution of one production platform. Chinese factories have perfected this model to an extreme. In regions such as Shenzhen, Dongguan, and Suzhou, entire industrial clusters emerged where within a radius of a few dozen kilometers you can find suppliers of optics, LED light sources, PCB assembly, plastic housings, and cooling components. Thanks to that, a projector can be born faster than a European certification cycle can even finish. This is not craftsmanship. This is an industrial conveyor belt of design. OEMs do not compete primarily on design, they compete on unit cost, component availability, and speed of rollout. When a new trend appears, Android in projectors, Wi-Fi 6, Bluetooth, a new LED package, OEM factories can adapt within months. The brand adapts it in a marketing campaign. In this world, the projector stops being an individual product, it becomes a module, a platform that can be configured like a set of bricks. Different RAM, different flash storage, different optics, a stronger LED emitter, same construction, different price tier. That is why a budget projector priced at a couple hundred zloty and a better model priced at twice as much often look nearly identical. The difference is not a technological revolution. It is a different configuration of the same production base. The most important part is that OEMs do not build for the end consumer. Their client is a sales platform, an importer, a retail chain, or a brand that wants to fill a market gap quickly. The projector is produced not because someone dreamed of creating the perfect home cinema, but because an Excel sheet shows demand for cheap image-on-the-wall entertainment. And here, the romantic myth of consumer electronics ends. We enter the era of industrial standardization of leisure. Home cinema stops being a product of engineers' passion. It becomes a product of scale, logistics, and margin. And that is only the beginning of the story. If someone had told electronics executives 20 years ago that a projector would be sold without a store, without a local electronics showroom, without a domestic distributor, without a regional warehouse, they would have been labeled a fantasist. Today, it is routine. Temu and AliExpress are not just another online shop. They are a new layer of commercial infrastructure that has changed how OEM factories reach customers. They are not retail platforms in the classic sense. They are logistics and algorithm systems. They connect factories, consolidation hubs, sorting centers, and courier networks into a single digital sales channel. In practical terms, this means a projector can leave a production line in China and arrive in a European apartment without ever stopping inside the traditional distribution chain. AliExpress spent years building this model slowly. It trained customers to wait for a parcel. It normalized lower prices in exchange for longer delivery. Temu did it differently. Instead of asking for patience, it offered an aggressive strategy of subsidized logistics and subsidized pricing. Shipping top-ups, centrally financed discounts, promotions that feel like political campaigns. The goal was not margin. The goal was market capture and habit rewiring. For OEM factories, it was the signal they had been waiting for. Instead of selling projectors to importers and European brands, they could enter a direct distribution model. The platform absorbed the roles of store, warehouse, marketing engine, and payment processor. The manufacturer focused on what it does best, mass production. In this arrangement, the projector becomes part of a data flow. The platform's algorithms decide which models get pushed, which appear on the front page, which disappear into the depths of search results. Price stops being a simple reflection of production cost. It becomes a tool in the attention war. That is why the same projector can cost the equivalent of $150 one day and $300 a week later, not because the LED emitter or the plastic suddenly became more expensive, but because the promotion algorithm shifted. Platforms like Temu do not sell single products. They sell an ecosystem of cheap, impulsive consumption. A projector is not competing only against another projector. It is competing against a power bank, headphones, a smartwatch, and a child's toy, all inside the same endless scroll. For the European market, this means erosion of the classic consumer electronics retail model. Physical stores and local distributors are no longer the only gate to hardware. The projector stops being a shelf product. It becomes a feed product. This model has a price. After-sales service is limited. Warranties can be symbolic. Direct contact with the maker practically does not exist. Yet for a large share of customers, it is an acceptable trade-off. The low price compensates for the lack of service comfort. In this way, Temu and AliExpress did not just change how projectors are sold, they changed consumer psychology. They trained people to treat electronics as fast, cheap, replaceable, not as an investment, but as a temporary solution. And it is exactly that mental shift that opened the road to the next stage of the story: global logistics that allows low-cost electronics to move faster and farther than ever before. When you order a projector on Temu or AliExpress, you rarely think about its route. The parcel shows up after a few days or weeks, and the story disappears from your mind. But before it reaches your door, it passes through one of the most complex logistics systems international trade has ever built. That system did not appear by accident. It is part of the New Silk Road, a network of transport corridors China has been building for over a decade to reduce export dependence on maritime bottlenecks and shorten the path to Europe. Projectors, like a vast portion of cheap electronics, leave factories in southern and eastern China. They get gathered in consolidation hubs where thousands of e-commerce orders are merged into larger batches. Their decisions are made: air, rail, or sea. Air is fastest but most expensive, used especially during promotional campaigns when the platform wants shorter delivery times to increase conversion. Sea is cheapest but slow. A container of electronics can take more than a month to reach Europe. Rail is the compromise, more expensive than sea, cheaper than air, and much faster than shipping by vessel. In recent years, rail has become one of the pillars of cheap electronics distribution. Freight trains running through Central Asia, the Caucasus, Russia, Turkey, and Eastern Europe have cut delivery times from 6 weeks to a matter of days. That changed the economics of online sales. The projector stopped being a product from far away. It became an item that can compete on time with European distribution. Along the way, there are nodes, ports, rail terminals, free trade zones. Parcels are sorted, transshipped, relabeled, and transferred between transport systems. In Europe, these gateways include Mediterranean ports, Central European logistics hubs, and giant e-commerce sorting centers built specifically for high-volume Asian platforms. The projector that finally ends up in your home often passes through multiple countries, even though you bought it with a single click. It is a physical trace of trade geopolitics. This system works because China treated logistics as a strategic investment, not as a cost, but as an instrument of economic expansion. Railways, ports, container terminals, and transshipment centers are built not to sell steel and concrete, but to sell goods. The projector is one of millions of products riding on that infrastructure. For Europe, this creates a new dependency. An increasing share of cheap electronics arrives directly from Asia, bypassing local manufacturers and local distribution layers. That changes market structure, price pressure, and the model of competition. Local companies lose not because their marketing is weaker, but because they do not control the logistics infrastructure that sets the new baseline. In this way, the New Silk Road stops being an abstract geopolitical project. It becomes a consumer routine. Every cheap parcel with a projector is a small material fragment of it, but even this infrastructure does not yet explain one more thing: why these devices look the way they look. Why they are plastic, simple, sometimes blunt. Why aesthetics give way to functional minimalism. That takes us to the next layer of the story. Why do these projectors look cheap? The first impression after pulling a budget projector out of the box can be disappointing. Plastic casing, simple shapes, visible assembly gaps, no elegant finish. Compared to premium hardware, it looks raw, sometimes even clumsy. Many people interpret this as proof of low quality or sloppy manufacturing. In reality, it is a deliberate result of designing for economic survival. OEM projectors are not designed by teams obsessed with user experience as a lifestyle concept. They are designed by teams optimizing unit cost. Every structural decision begins with one question: what does this cost at the scale of 1,000,000 units? Thicker plastic means higher material cost. A more complex casing form means more expensive injection molds. Extra decorative elements mean longer assembly time. Every rounded flourish, every ornamental detail, every metal accent is cents that become millions in mass production. That is why a budget projector looks the way it does. A simple block shape means cheaper tooling. Flat surfaces mean faster assembly. Fewer parts mean fewer failure points and lower service risk. This is not minimalist aesthetics. It is margin survival aesthetics. The same logic operates inside. The optics are not designed for perfect contrast. They are designed for acceptable image at the lowest possible cost. Cooling is not quiet because quiet costs money. It is efficient enough so the LED does not overheat under normal use. The fan is louder but cheaper. Another trade-off: electronics are configured by the same rule. RAM and flash are selected not for smooth multitasking but for the minimum the system can tolerate. Android on a projector is often not a full smart TV experience. It is a stripped, adapted variant designed to run on the lowest resources. It can be slower, it can freeze, but it opens Netflix and YouTube. And that is enough for the mass market claim. From the factory's perspective, the core goal is not to delight the user. It is to meet three conditions: be cheap to produce, be stable enough to reduce returns, and be functional enough that sales platforms can advertise it as smart. This creates a paradox. An ugly projector can be healthier as a business product than a beautiful one. Beautiful means more expensive. More expensive means less scale. Less scale means more financial risk for the OEM, so aesthetics loses to math. This also explains why successive generations of budget projectors look almost the same, not because manufacturers are incapable of doing better, but because changing the casing shape means new tooling costs. And in a low-margin world, design stability is more valuable than freshness. In practice, the look of a budget projector is a record of an entire chain of decisions. From the final price pushed by Temu, through logistics costs, down to the minimal margin that allows the factory to stay alive. This is not a product designed to impress. It is a product designed to survive inside the brutal ecosystem of cheap electronics. And that is why the next logical question becomes not why do they look cheap, but how do specific OEM brands operate inside this system? How some of them try to position slightly higher? How the players that balance low price with a bit more predictability actually work. Here, the MagCubic story begins. MagCubic is not a classical electronics manufacturer in the old sense. It is a brand that emerged inside the OEM ecosystem, a label attached to a handful of hardware platforms meant to serve multiple price segments. It does not build its own factories. It does not develop unique optical engines from scratch. It operates by configuring ready solutions and positioning them in the market. In practice, MagCubic functions like a switch between shelves. The same technological logic, the same production ecosystem, but different compromises. At the very bottom end, MagCubic sells projectors designed for maximum volume. These devices aim to hit a minimum functional threshold, display an image in 720p class, run a simplified Android layer, provide Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, and remain stable enough to avoid a return avalanche. Everything is subordinated to price. Optics are as basic as quality control will allow. The LED is bright enough that you can see an image at night. The casing is thin. The fan is loud. RAM is minimal. The projector is not meant to impress. It is meant to function and cost as little as possible. This segment is not built to create brand love. It is built to feed platform algorithms. The product must look decent in listing photos, have a persuasive description, and start with an aggressive price. Everything else is secondary. But MagCubic often builds a parallel track, a higher mid-tier, and this is where the more interesting shift happens. In pricier models, you start seeing different choices. Better LED modules, more stable cooling, higher brightness, slightly more refined scaling. It is still not premium, still OEM logic, but the philosophy changes. The projector is no longer a 200 Zwati impulse. It becomes a half step toward an actual home cinema routine. The buyer expects smoother system behavior, more stable Wi-Fi, less irritating fan noise, and an image that does not exhaust the eyes after an hour. Technologically, this is still the same production platform, but configured upward. More RAM, a better optical module, a stronger LED, improved thermal management. Not a revolution, an evolution within the same industrial backbone. And here you can see Magcubic's real role, not as an innovator, but as an operator of segments. The brand does not sell a fundamentally new technology. It sells different versions of the same technology depending on what the customer is willing to pay. Magcubic is not truly competing with Epson or BenQ on pure image quality. It is competing with other OEM labels on price-to-function ratio. Their real rival is not premium home cinema. Their real rival is the next Temu projector in your feed. That is why one Magcubic catalog can contain models that are genuinely weak and models that are surprisingly decent for the money. It looks like product chaos from the outside. From the OEM perspective, it is portfolio optimization, catch the buyer at the cheapest entry point, then gradually move them upward. Magcubic becomes a perfect case study of the new projector era. Not a brand built around engineering identity, but a brand built around production platforms, sales algorithms, and e-commerce logistics. It is not a company designing home cinema. It is a company managing access to cheap image. And that leads directly into the next step of the story. What happens when the same OEM world is given a more Western face, when brands try to civilize the chaos, add predictable software, cleaner design, and more credible after-sales support. That is where names like Wanbo and budget sublines tied to major manufacturers such as TCL enter the frame. At some point, every mass production system hits a limit. You cannot sell only with price forever. The market starts expecting more, less random software, more stable firmware, better industrial design, some form of service infrastructure that does not feel like a coin flip. In the OEM projector space, brands such as Wanbo and entry-level lines connected to larger ecosystems, including TCL, began to push beyond the absolute minimum. Wanbo grew in the space between the raw Temu-style OEM world and consumer electronics with ambition. It is still not a company that designs everything from scratch, still built on Chinese production solutions, but the difference is that someone tries to impose a higher standard than bare survival. The product becomes more user-oriented. Casings look more intentional. The interface feels more coherent. The software is less chaotic. Updates arrive more often. A layer of quality control appears beyond pure statistical tolerance. It remains OEM, but with a stronger overlay of discipline and brand governance. Even more revealing is the TCL case and budget lines like Lin. Here you can see a large manufacturer using the same logic we discussed with OEM ecosystems elsewhere. TCL does not necessarily build entirely separate platforms solely for cheap projectors. It can leverage existing OEM pathways, integrate them into a distribution and support ecosystem, and sell them under a logo that consumers already associate with televisions and large display hardware. That alone changes perception. A device that looks like a nameless gadget in a Temu listing can feel like normal consumer electronics when it carries TCL on the box. The price rises, trust rises, expectations rise too. Yet the technical differences are often smaller than the marketing suggests. The platform can remain similar. LED source, optical path, mainboard architecture, still OEM territory. What changes most meaningfully is the soft layer, firmware tuning, stability, update cadence, access to service channels, and a predictable return and warranty process. The same foundation, a different wrapper of control and accountability. In practice, this creates a new class of devices, half OEM, half branded projectors, not premium, not raw, but a middle compromise many buyers find perfect. The price remains relatively low, yet the risk feels lower. And this shows the market is not black and white. It is not Chinese junk versus real brands. It is a continuum where the same industrial technology shifts along a scale depending on how many layers of control, software discipline, distribution infrastructure, and marketing credibility are placed on top of it. Wanbo and TCL-linked budget lines do not change the nature of OEM. They civilize it. They try to make it more predictable, more acceptable for mainstream consumers, more compatible with Western expectations. But that move has a cost. More control means higher costs, and higher costs mean a higher final price. Which brings us to the next key question. What, in concrete terms, is the difference between a projector bought directly through Temu and an extremely similar device sold under a European-facing brand with a familiar warranty story and a local retail channel?